Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii Election 2014, State House Districts 20, Kaimuki, Palolo, St. Louis Heights, Manalani Heights, Wilhelmina Rise, and 45, Wailua, Kunia, Mililani, Schofield, Mokuleia, Waipio Acres. Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Malia Maddock, your host for tonight's show. Our election coverage continues tonight with two House District races. First up will be State House District 20, Kaimuki, Palolo, St. Louis Heights, and Wilhelmina Rise, where three candidates are jockeying to represent the community. Then midway through the show, we'll switch our focus to the other end of the island of Oahu and bring in the two candidates battling to represent State House District 45, Wailua, Kunia, and Mililani. We invite you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Tonight, the seating arrangement and order of the questions was done by random draw. Now to our candidates. Julia Allen is the Republican candidate for House District 20. She is a small business owner and has been a legislative aide for 10 years. Representative Calvin Say is a Democrat and the incumbent in this district. Speaker Emeritus Say, who stepped down from the House's top leadership post in 2012, has the distinction of being the longest-serving Speaker of the House since statehood and is the first Speaker of Chinese ancestry. Keiko Bonk represents the Hawaii Green Party, which she co-founded, and is the Northwest Hawaiian Islands campaign director for the Hawaii Audubon Society. She was a member of the Hawaii County Council from 1992 to 1996 and served as the council chairwoman. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Julia, my first question goes to you. You've launched campaigns for the State House for the last 10 years and have not gotten elected. What makes this bid different?
I'm feeling that this is really getting a much better response when I'm out. I see positives. Now, my own personal view is I haven't lost. I only lose if I quit, and I am not quitting. I see it as just one more step along the way. I've never seen it as a loss. I see it as a win for getting another voice out into the public so people know that there is another view and another way to vote. And I think it's a big loss if we didn't have that.
All right, thank you. Keiko, no one has been elected to the legislature from the Green Party. Can you tell me what makes you a viable candidate?
Well, I think that it's about time we do elect someone from the Green Party to bring a new vision and a more modern way of doing policy making in the state. I think I would bring a fresh, more democratic, fair, and open government policies to the state legislature. In the past, our focus has been in county government, where you make land use decisions, and where you actually spend a good deal of time designing the way communities live. That's been the focus of Greens throughout America. But I think now we need to step up to the legislative houses, because a lot of large corporate money is coming into the state of Hawaii via organizations like ALEC and through the Koch brothers, and they're starting to bring legislation that's terrible for Hawaii here. The Right to Farm bill, all these right to bills that are going to take away the rights of most people. And that's the distinction for the Greens, is we don't take any corporate money, especially large corporate funding.
All right, thank you. Calvin,
Yes.
Longest speaker ever, I believe 14 years.
Yes.
Can you be as effective now that you are no longer speaker?
Oh yes, I've been very effective the past 2 years in voicing my concerns as far as proposed legislation. A lot of times the public doesn't realize as a speaker, you become the mediator, arbitrator of the 51 members of the House. In this particular case, I was very fortunate to say my point of view on the floor of the House on all the different issues that arose during this past 2 years. And some of them were very interesting in regards to the hotel tax credit, which I stated very well in support, because in the future, we're not going to get more hotel developments, but more timeshares and condotels, which will then be, not helping our local residents of the state of Hawaii in the area of jobs. The other issue that I spoke with reservations was the same-sex marriage issue last year during the special session. I was happy that the House of Representatives, with the input that I shared with the leadership and the majority caucus, was to ask that, can you put in some provisions of some exemptions for our religious groups?
All right, 2 examples of where you've stood. Gia, to you, what do you think is the biggest issue facing District 20?
I think it's right now the cost of living for people. It's in much more elderly communities, an old part of east of Oahu, and the people are seeing all of their costs across the board going up, and a lot of these people are on fixed incomes. I think there has to be a way to get a better control on just the issue of being able to, for businesses to function on a level where the prices come down so that people can then live within, a lot of times, a very limited amount of money. Yes.
All right, Keiko, your choice for the biggest issue facing.
Well, the biggest issues facing Kaimuki and Palolo and this area are the same issues facing the whole state. We have the highest cost of living amongst a lot of the larger cities in America, and yet we have we probably have one of the lowest salaries and ability for people to make money here. That's a big discrepancy. What can be done? We can raise the minimum wage should be much higher than $7, $10. In Seattle, there's a $15 proposal. Even that, if anybody here can live on $15 an hour, we're not going to be living that high on the horse. But that's a minimal standard of living for someone coming out of college or something like that, or working in a hourly position.
Where would you want to see Hawaii's minimum wage?
Right now, 15.
15.
Like Seattle, because we have probably about as high a cost of living as New York. And but anyway, for our district, I'd say it would be the same issues. We need to plan there. It's one of the only more local neighborhoods left in Honolulu, probably the only small business neighborhood that has the old flavor of Hawaii. And we need to lock it in with a special design district that would allow people to keep the small business and not be overrun by the 2 neighboring Bishop Estate ownership of Kahala and Moiliili. That's probably going to be the new Kaka'ako moving that way.
All right, Calvin, to you, what do you think is the biggest issue?
The biggest issue in the district right now is what I think Julia stated, that we have a great majority of kupunas, the old-time seniors, who are on fixed income. We've got to find a way in providing more services to these seniors in the area of food, in the area of tax relief, in the area of property tax relief, in the area of increase in sewage fees, water fees, etc. That was some of the discussion that the seniors have always shared with me. Another big topic that is part of the overall district is the area of, can we accommodate more housing in the area? You're seeing more and more units being built on that same property that was a single-family home. And it is putting a lot of pressure on the neighboring homes where these big homes are being built. I'm not against it. It's a question of, are we doing the right thing as far as having these major 3-4 unit homes in the district of St. Louis and Palolo, Manalani Heights and Kaimuki? Maybe that's part of the redevelopment, but it should be smart development, whereby the city should be looking at the land use ordinances of what we have today. Another case in point was walking on Palolo Avenue. Boy, from one home, it became 6 units. And with that 6 units, there's only 2 cars, a garage. What happens to the other 4 units that have a car or automobile? It compresses it more and more on the streets. And that's where a lot of the residents at the board meetings, association meetings, Calvin, what you gonna do? They're encroaching in my driveway, Malia. I said, well, the only thing I could think about is you have to call the police to see if they can enforce it, to ask that particular automobile owner, can you move your car so that you can accommodate and have the respect of your neighbors?
All right, I'd like to give the 3 of you a chance to ask a question of another candidate, the candidate of your choice. Julia, may I start with you? Would you have a question for one of the other 2 candidates?
Yes, I'd like to ask Keiko, why would she limit the minimum wage of $15?
Oh, I wouldn't. But I think she asked me what it should start with right now.
Why would you limit it there?
I said I wouldn't.
Oh.
I mean, if the legislature would like to go for more, I'd be willing to talk about it. But I'd say right now we've gone to what, 10? What was the new one? Yeah, 10. I think more importantly than even weighing just talking about minimum wage. We need to start to do other incentives for people to have housing that they can afford. And there's a really good report out on housing by Appleseed, the law nonprofit that's for economic justice. And they've put together a program on how Hawaii can start to actually build houses for the people, the multi-level people that need housing in Hawaii, not just the poor, not just the homeless, not just the elderly, but young people, and so forth and so on.
All right. Kellen, why don't we go to you? What would be your question for one of the two candidates?
The question I would pose to Keiko is, if elected from the Green Party, who will accept her as a single individual in the House of Representatives? Will it be the Republican caucus or the Democratic caucus, or will she have her own caucus on her own?
Well, that's a good question. And likewise, when I was elected as the sole Green on the Hawaii County Council and in the whole state, I was the first elected Green in the nation in 1992. I became the chair by forming alliances between both these parties. And I can do that while working on policy as an advocate, and as well as going into the caucus the legislative session. I work for the people of Hawaii. I don't work for the caucuses of the legislature. And everybody that gets elected goes into office with the equal rights to voice the public's opinions. I will be a fighter for the people of Hawaii. You know, there are only really two parties in this, two political entities in our government processes these days. There's a corporate sort of interest in politics, and that rules most of the candidates that run for public office in Hawaii. Millions of dollars come into Hawaii's campaign chest, war chest. My opponent here, prime example, millions of dollars from corporations, and then there's everybody else. And the people of my district have not had a voice really in the legislature for 36 years.
Okay, and Keiko, let me give you a chance to pose a question of one of the candidates.
Okay. I would like to pose this question. Why did Representative Say, under his speakership, introduce such a backwards piece of legislation called the PLDC, the Public Lands Corporation, this corporation, to pretty much eliminate the rights of the people to hold on to their best public lands, and also to have the best assessment of planning in Hawaii, and set us back. The people spoke, they repealed it, but he was the initiator of it, and with Neil Abercrombie, the spokespeople for the executive
and
and
let's give him a
legislative
chance to
branch.
respond.
I'm happy that she's asking that question because, yes, I do believe in public-private partnerships. The people of the state of Hawaii has to recognize that we have a lot of state lands that are fallow. We are not using it to its highest and best use. And if we could lease it out to private developers to do it, be my guest so that it could generate revenues for the people of the state of Hawaii in seeing that these funds be used for public services. Another point that I wanted to bring up is that all of these issues that some of these opponents were against it were incorrect. There was no exemption on the environmental impact statements or the assessments. There was no exemptions on archaeological studies. There was no exemptions on the SMA, shoreline management. What we were trying to do was to determine if a public school that has been closed, could you do a public-private partnership? Because it's very difficult to get involved in a public-private partnership as far as redeveloping a school for the greater good of the community. An example I give you is Jefferson School. A lot of property. People have talked about why don't we build more housing there? But can the state of Hawaii have the resources to build it? Why can't I lease it to you as a developer to build it? That's the kind of discussion we were focusing on. It wasn't just that we're going to give this state lands to these private developers. No, there are conditions, and there was provisions whereby the individual groups of the lands that are affected, from Department of Land and Natural Resources to the Department of Education to the University of Hawaii, they will all have a committee to determine how that property could be used for the best for the people of the state of Hawaii. And finally, That particular measure, I say it may have been introduced by me, but I don't recall introducing it. It could have been done by request, at the request of some of our colleagues. And if I stand wrong, please correct me, because my whole point is that I was looking at how we could generate revenues without raising taxes.
Okay, Julia, you seem to be muttering as if you had a response to that.
I always do
Go
that,
ahead,
don't I?
yes.
I say one of the things that Calvin did not mention there is one of the duties or responsibilities of the speaker, I think, needs to be recognized, that that person receives a lot of suggested legislation by request. Some of that actually is just part of the process that anybody in that position would be handling. And I do give a lot of respect for how Calvin has been able to handle that job. And so I can see where maybe the governor has legislation or somebody else who said, you know, I would like you to handle this. And Calvin has actually done that very well. I would give him credit for it.
All right.
Well, can I speak to that? Just one clarity.
Let's keep it brief so we can get on to another topic.
Well, in actuality, he was being an out in the public spokesperson for the PLDC in forums and places like that. And most of the people throughout the state of Hawaii who's worked on land use issues in public communities were totally against this, because I disagree with his interpretation. The reason it got repealed was it did open it up for the largest developers and corporations to take hold of the best lands that the public has in trust. And that land should never be taken away by these large corporations. We subsidize corporations enough. Government is not a private organization. And he had a large developer appointed to the executive director role of that, and the plans were going to be without public participation to sell off schools and whatever they feel fit. Waikiki shouldn't have just development going on there. It should have schools. It should have open lands for the public.
All right, Kevin, let me give you a very brief time to respond to that, and then let's move on to a new topic. Any response to what Keiko just said?
I would say let the record state for itself. As the Speaker of the House, during that period in time, the initiative was by the Senate on the PLDC. And I can state for the record, it was the senator from Waihoa, Donovan De La Cruz, who was really pushing it hard. And in the fairness of the House negotiating with the Senate, that was one of the measures that was a trade-off for House bills, for Senate bills, as far as the topic. And this particular PLDC was also tied in, to some degree, transit-oriented development sites, public-private partnership, once more. And maybe we have a philosophical difference, but in closing, the Speaker of the House is looking for ways to generate revenues without increasing taxes for the greater good
Okay,
of the
let's
residents.
go to taxes.
Okay.
Julia,
Yes.
is there any reason that you would be willing to vote to raise taxes, and if so, for what and why?
No, I would not. I have signed the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, and I have agreed to oppose any and all tax increases. I think that our state, at all levels, not just the legislature, but the city and county, they constantly look for more revenue. And we don't lack revenue. We actually have sufficient revenue. What we have is excessive spending.
All right, Keiko.
Taxes are run government. And also we can have user fees that we don't really address.
Would you be for a vote for raising some taxes or user fees?
Depends on what it is. Assessing everything at this point, yes. I think that we have 1.3 million people in Hawaii who pay a lot of taxes for the services and the benefits they get. However, there are 8.5 million people coming through this state that I don't think pay their fair share. And I don't think the businesses, the three largest businesses that sort of that pushes that industry, which we subsidize, is paying its fair share. So I would like to address this. I'd be motivated to looking to see how we can take help people with small businesses in Hawaii pay less taxes, and the ones that take their corporate profits out of Hawaii, I don't mind taxing them a lot.
Okay, Calvin.
At this point in time, I did sign a letter to the Tax Review Commission in 2011 that I do not support any tax increases. And for the House of Representatives, I can say this. We took the approach of trying to address the budget deficit during the Great Recession by looking at the GET tax exemptions that occurred, that we have on the books. There were 30-something entities that are exempt from the general excise tax. that was equivalent to about $500 million of lost general fund revenues. That was the approach we took in 2011 in trying to address that budget shortfall. No GET increase, but let's maybe reduce it for the exemptions, or repeal it, or suspend it for the exemptions. And the legislature did that, because on both chambers, the Senate did not want any GET increase from what I heard, and they didn't pass anything over. And that's where Governor had a hard time in balancing the budget.
All right, let's go to a viewer's question. This is from Kapahulu, and
Yes.
it's for yourself. There's a question regarding your residency to represent your district. Could you explain the controversy and offer proof of where you reside?
Yes, I'm a resident of the Polo District for all my life, 62 years. I'm very honored to say that in 1976 I got elected to the State House. And the scary part was more that in 2006, I had my first challenge as far as my residency. And people don't realize that challenge came from the Big Island. A person from the Big Island questioning my residency, where nobody wanted to come up front to say this, this, and this. That was the first challenge in 2006. For the past 8 years now, I've had 4 challenges. Of the 4, 3 was at the county clerk, where they verified my residency as 1822 10th Avenue. 2 years ago, this particular final chapter of this challenge is in the circuit courts, where I attended that hearing, where Judge Nakasone ruled in favor of dismissing it. Then the plaintiffs appealed to the ICA, Intermediate Court of Appeals, and now we are back at the circuit court. I feel that with the evidence that is given to the judge, I personally feel that she should probably, be in favor of dismissing the case at this point in time. That's what's before the judge on September 18th at the circuit court.
Why do you think this issue has plagued you for so many years? I mean, it's not something that happens, I would say, to a lot of candidates. I mean, why would people think that there is some truth to the fact that you do not reside where you say you do?
It's probably because sometimes I'm never at home when people do go and pass by my home. My wife was a very excellent caregiver who sacrificed her time in trying to take care of her mother and father. But more importantly, I go back to the old Japanese values and Chinese values and the Hawaiian values, Hanai. I was very lucky that my mother-in-law took care of my 2 sons while my wife and I started off our careers. Being away from home is the sacrifice that my wife and my in-laws had to make because I was never home. I think the 2 candidates here would attest to it. The campaign, in the morning you get up at 5, you're out by 6, 6:30, wave to 8:30, going to work, then going to the session. During the session, being the finance chair, being the speaker for 14 years and 6 years as finance, it took a lot of time. And sometimes, yes, on the weekends I do go home, but on the weekdays they see that my car is empty. And I also shared that with the county clerks. And that's the reason why.
All right, let me ask you briefly, are you both satisfied with his answer in terms of residency?
You want to answer first?
I think there is always a question about whether he has genuinely resided there because he has been absent so much of the time. And I think it's actually a reasonable thing to be challenging and questioning. Yes.
I don't believe he lives there. And the other challenges came from residents. The current 6 plaintiffs are residents of the area. In fact, right now, the interesting little addition to this sort of 20-year play out of questions of his residency has just occurred in the last 2 weeks, where the Speaker Emeritus asked the current Speaker to not only intervene in the process of the Circuit Court, but to also have our Attorney General, who I helped pay for, be his lawyer now. And the court has approved of this intervention based on, executive privilege or legislative privilege or whatever. And I don't think it's right. I think it should have played out as the Court of Appeal decided in 2013. And he would have had to prove through bills and things like that he had actually lived there. He has stated in neighborhood boards that he keeps a house vacant and he goes home to Nuuanu. And I approached Speaker Suki myself 2 years ago to ask him if he could intervene, and he says, the House does not intervene, and he says, I know that Calvin lives in Nuuanu.
Okay, we're in our
That's
final
Speaker
moments.
Suki.
In our final moments, let me get this last question from Kalia in Waikiki. Since Calvin Say states there is unused state land, why don't we set up a tent city with security in one of these unused areas that has public transportation? Please comment each one.
I believe that Mayor Fossey did attempt that in Ala Park, and that a lot of problems arose, a lot of it having to do with security and illegal activities, and it ended up having to be taken down. Unfortunately, even though we liked the idea, I think it didn't work.
Keiko.
What specifically is the question about homelessness?
The question is using used state lands with security for the homeless and providing public transportation.
Well, that's only a part of resolving issue. The big issue now is that we're starting housing first structures, both within the state and the county, which is a progressive thing. But we have to do much more. I mean, there's a whole series of recommendations. Like I said, Appleseed has recommendations on how to build houses fast and all these sorts of things. But we could consider that.
So you would possibly support something along
Yeah,
those
I would see like where, when, and all that. But the more serious question is, how are you going to get houses for people, not just tents?
Okay, Calvin.
We're already doing it at Pier 1, where we have a state facility for housing on state property. The question will be, can we get the support of the community if it's abutting, the community, state land abutting a community? Because you have to have a public hearing whereby are the residents in that particular area willing to accept a housing project, homeless project in that particular district. I would say that yes, we should look at all state lands that are available to create these homeless housing shelters for these individuals. But one of my major concerns, Malia, is this. They have to abide by the rules and regs of that particular homeless facility. And sometimes they don't. And that's where they're asked to leave.
All right. Thank you all for spending this time with us this evening. Coming up, we'll have the two candidates running for State House District 45, Wailua, Kunia, and Mililani, to talk about the issues facing their community and how they stand on statewide challenges as well. Right now, please enjoy this message about Hiki No and the role it plays in Hawaii's future.
Hiki No has come so far from just a few students to where it is now.
If they're from like Na'alehu, Big Island, or Kekaha, Kauai, Hiki No gives them the ability to let the whole state know what they're expressing and what their concerns are.
I think Hiki No encourages a lot of pride in your community and your school, so you tend to look for those stories. You want to tell those stories.
I really feel having these talented kids who are vested in this community and giving their heart and soul to what they're doing is what is going to guarantee our future.
Keep telling those stories and be proud of where you're from.
The stories of our communities and our neighbors, told by the students who live there. Hiki No, Thursday nights at 7:30 on PBS Hawaii.
Every Thursday night, Hiki No, which precedes Insights, presents stories told by Hawaii students about their neighbors and the communities in which they live. Welcome back to Insights on PBS Hawaii. Agriculture, housing, and traffic are some of the issues facing the communities of Kunia, Wailua, and Mililani. Who will be the best candidate for the job? As always, we encourage you to join our conversation by calling, emailing, or tweeting your questions and comments. Now to our guest. Representative Lauren Cheap Matsumoto is the incumbent in District 45, a Republican. She was first elected in 2012 and named Minority Whip, a position she's held since being elected. Michael Magoai is a former state representative, having served from 2000 to 2010 as a Democrat. As a representative, he served as the vice speaker during his last term. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. Our first question, Lauren, will go to you. As a first-term lawmaker, what do you consider as your largest achievement for your district?
I think the largest achievement for my district was this year we created a historic coalition with Republicans and Democrats working together. And the result of that was a lot of capital improvement projects brought out back to the district, like the Wailua bike path, a lot of funds for Milani High School, as well as the middle school and elementary schools. And I think it's that working together, it's that next generation of leadership that is bringing about change, and not this stalemate that we seem to have had before, but real change to move our state forward.
Michael, why should voters choose you?
Well, voters should choose me because based on my previous record in serving in the House, because District 46 was basically a rural area all the way from Laia to Del Monte Cunha. And during that 10 years, I have achieved a lot, saving Kuluku Hospital, Pupuke Pomalo, and helped the Pomalo camp from closing. But I feel that life is short. There's things that we need to do because everything we look at, as a House of Representatives, there's 2 years, Senate is 4 years. So the question is, the House is more progressive as far as what they're doing because they know that once they get in, they have to do for re-election again. But I feel that life is short. We need to do as much as we can and to help the people in the community.
All right, we have a pile of questions from viewers. Let's start with Daniel via Cover It Live. For both candidates, I'm from Wailua. In any of your campaigns, have you taken a contribution from a GMO company? Lauren.
I have not taken any GMO money because this is an issue that's really important in our district. We have all of the GMO companies, Monsanto, Syngenta, Pioneer, and for me, I know a lot of GMO issues have been in the state legislature for the last 2 years, and to have an unbiased approach, I've sent back any money that has been given to me from a GMO company just so I can have an unbiased vote when that vote comes.
Michael?
As far as money from GMO, yes, I have received one, and which I accepted. And you have to remember that Wailua used to be a plantation town, and the only way to survive is agriculture and water. So when Monsanto Pioneer Hybrid came in, they offered an opportunity to basically till the land and fallow. Because as far as GMO, I'm for labeling the food as far as GMO, but basically because you have to look at we're in an agriculture situation, where do we get labor jobs for our people? And basically most of the people are looking more in agriculture. So I'm looking at it more as a contributor to the community after the plantation shut down.
To that point, we have a question via email from Matt. Agriculture and sustainability are hot topics today. What have you done to make a difference in our state in regards to this issue? Lauren.
Agriculture is near and dear to my heart. My family has an egg farm in Wahiawa, which my great-grandfather started. It's 104 years old, so I'm a fourth-generation farmer. And so for me, I feel like my time in the legislature, I've really been able to be a voice for agriculture, whether it's keeping our agricultural lands zoned agriculture, or whether it's helping farmers with new farmer loans, but also through the Future Farmers of America program, getting our new farmers up and going. And those are all things that I've advocated for in the legislature. And agriculture is not something that I just advocate for, it's something that I really do live.
Michael.
As far as when I was in the legislature, we passed the important agricultural land that we basically try to sustain and keep some land from being developed. Because we had the Galbert land, basically we see the consortium of the state and Trust for Public Land bought the land. Now it's there, but now we need funding for that. And as far as the biggest thing for us right now is getting water there, because Dole is right now presently selling the land. They're looking for buyers right now. So basically we need to make sure, and also with the water coming down from Lake Wilson, we might also make sure that the furrows, the tunnels, that everything, that the water comes down to the North Shore, because you need water to grow and you need the right water. So right now, as far as agriculture, I've been a staunch advocate of agriculture in the past.
A classic example of this conflict between agriculture and development would be Ho'opili. Of course, that rezoning issue is a city issue, but in terms of traffic on state highways, it's very much with the legislature. Your thoughts on seeing sort of a massive conversion of agriculture to housing and the resulting issues of traffic? Let's start with you, Michael.
As far as, right now, the biggest thrust right now is the rail coming through that land. Okay, the question is, the rail should be finished by 2022, hopefully done by that time. The question going to be is that, yes, what they did with Ho'opili, they made a compromise as far as you have ag lands with the land you have there. So it's a consortium and basic coordination with the farmers who can farm, the truck farm, and all that. But, to me, I look at it is that the thing has been reviewed with all the parties concerned, but the question now is how it's going to happen. So I'm looking at to see that, like D.H. Horton, that they stick to what they promised to give to the people and the farmers. That the proof of the pudding is to be that.
The size that they set
Yeah,
aside
and also
for.
too, right now is that we need housing, and that there's no housing being built. I know construction is busy, but housing is not being built. And especially with the low rates on your mortgage interest right now, people need some housing besides Kaka'ako.
So you're not upset to see something like Ho'opili go through?
Yeah.
Okay, Lauren.
There has to be a balance between development and agriculture, and I understand how difficult it is. My husband and I both work 2 jobs just to afford and get by as a young couple, and so affordable housing is an issue. However, I really think that we should keep our prime agricultural lands zoned as agriculture and develop more towards the urban core as well as along the rail line.
So would you rather see something like Ho'opili not happen?
Ho'opili, from what I understand, is along the rail line, and so that makes sense as it will be traveling into town, but I would prefer development towards the urban core where people's jobs are.
Closer,
yes.
Closer into town. All right. Let me ask 2 specific questions of each of you that we've gotten from viewers. From Carolyn via email, a question for you, Lauren. I remember watching you as Miss Hawaii. How did you go, or how do you make the change from pageants to politics?
It was a very unorthodox path to politics, but during my year as Miss Hawaii, what I loved the most about my job was serving my community, advocating on issues I was passionate about, and to me it was a natural extension to continue public service. It's the district where not only I was born and raised, but my parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, and even my great-great-grandparents. And so, although it seems like an unorthodox path, to me it made sense, and I just want to give back to the community that raised me.
Okay, Michael, from Dylan via Twitter, where do you live? The house you own, or he owns, in Mililani is not in HD 45. Right. Let me give you a chance to answer that.
Okay, right now I live in Waialua. I live with my mother on 67373 Fairton Highway. And right now she's aging. She's just made her 87, so we're basically watching her right now. So I'm living with her.
In Waialua?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. All right, from Carson via email, how would both of you, as our representative, encourage my generation, assuming it's a younger generation, to get involved in the process? Lauren, let's start with you.
It's an extremely important issue to get the younger generation involved. There's such a sense of apathy in our youth today. And when I first got elected, started an internship program in my office, and there's also a national program called Teach a Girl to Lead. And we had 5 interns from both Mililani High School as well as Waialua in our office, and it's really getting them to learn how to give back. And what was really neat is each of those interns went back to their schools and gave presentations to their class and did a whole voter registration.
Michael?
As far as me, I mean, I believe in mentoring. And when I was a legislator, I had a lot of interns that came to me. I had from the University of Hawaii, and also I went to the schools to make sure they come to me. And also I would reach out to the schools in the district, especially from Kahuku all the way down. Most of the people were coming from Kahuku. I mean, it's a far drive, but I would meet them halfway. But basically, what Lauren's mentioning, yes, a lot of intern and mentoring. And also, too, tell them don't be afraid to speak up.
Let me give you a chance right now, each of you, to ask each other a question. Lauren, do you have a question for Michael?
Somebody asked about where you live, and one of the only constitutionally mandated requirement for a representative is to live in the district that you represent. And I was able to read some of your literature that you sent, and you wrote, "I have owned my home and lived in Mililani since 1979.
That's correct.
However, when you represented from 2000 to 2010, your district had no portion of Mililani. So it's unclear whether or not you lived in your district then and whether or not you lived in your district now. And so how would you explain to voters?
Let me explain that, because in 1979, I bought a house in Mililani. We lived there. And basically, in 1990, I moved back to Waialua. We built a house in Waialua. And during that time, my son got born. And during that time, my father was sick with cancer, lung cancer, so we stayed there. So in 90, I've been there for a long time, and basically, I got involved in the community with neighborhood board, see what's going on, and one led to another. The previous representative was Alex Santiago. He decided to retire, so I was his campaign manager, so I decided to jump in and see what's it, and one led to another. So, I mean, you can own a home and you still live in Waialua. It doesn't, I mean, you're paying the dues and all that. So I'm looking at it as, it doesn't hurt to have a property, but also live in the district that you represent.
Michael, what would your question for Lauren be?
Okay, my question for Lauren is that since she told that her family is part of agriculture and be part of it, so could you tell me the difference between R1 and R2 water?
Yes, so R1 water you need to be able to use for leafy vegetables so it can eat. R2 water is not able to be used for leafy vegetables. It won't be able to be used for consumption, more for fruit trees. And that's one of the biggest problems for our agricultural lands in Wailua, because we only have R2 water. And that's why we need to upgrade to R1 so we can really start producing in our agricultural lands.
Well, basically, that's my main mantra for pushing all the years I've been there for 10 years, is basically to convert the water from Lake Wilson. So that way we can have more truck farmers, ag farmers growing those leafy vegetables that we need instead of going into Kunia land, because eventually the water that goes to Kunia from Waiholi Ditch will be absorbed by housing. So we need to basically perpetuate what we have on the North Shore, because the land will always be ag. But the question, how do we sustain it?
Any response to that?
And I agree. And that's where the focus really needs to be, is in the infrastructure. And something that we've been working on in the legislature, and hopefully through some partnerships we can get that done.
All right, let's go to more questions. A 400-foot wind turbine within 1 mile of your house means that you won't be able to sell it because of the low frequency hum, hum, hum sounds it makes. How do candidates feel about more of these? Michael, let's start with you.
I think the process of the windmills that you see right now in Kahuku and now in the Kauai Loa Plains, I think the people like First Wind, they have brought it to the community. They had hearings, they show them. And to me, that there's a process they have to go through before any permit is given. So the community has a big say whether it's there or not. Just like putting antennas behind your house, they have to go through a process. So I feel that a process, if they did it and they got it, then they denied the process of due purpose as far as getting a permit. So I would say that they would have a long road as far as having a windmill unless the community is agreeable.
Lauren.
I went to every single neighborhood board meeting, and this issue was brought up many times. And what I heard most frequently was we weren't really adequately prepared with what it was going to be like, how close it was going to be, how close to our homes it was really going to be. And so I think the biggest problem was a communication issue. I think we can all agree that we need renewable energy. Hawaii has one of the most aggressive goals, 40% by 2030. But I think it's that communication issue between the company and the community to make sure the community really knows what they're getting.
All right. From Moses and Nanakuli, another development question. How do the candidates feel about the Koa Ridge project? Michael.
Koa Ridge right now, it's a long, arduous battle for them right now. The Mililani Neighborhood Board basically didn't agree with the Koa Ridge because of the increase of traffic it might generate. But the question we have right now is, what do we allow to have more affordable housing for people out there to have? But again, everything is predicated on what's going to happen on Ho'opili, because Ho'opili is probably the one who will see what happens. But Koa Ridge, they have multiple phases they have to go through right now. It's not over as far as for the developer. I mean, they said they might get it, but I think right now it's a wait and see, because right now it's tremendous as far as pushing the infrastructure and also the traffic that we have.
Lauren.
The one positive about Koa Ridge is it has really been downsized from what the original plan was. And so there's a lot of questions. What the traffic's going to be like? Is the infrastructure there? And so I think as it continues to go through this process, those questions need to be answered, because I sit through sometimes 2 hours of traffic just to get into work and just to get home. And so I think that's at the top of minds of a lot of the constituents when you ask them about Koa Ridge. And I think those questions need to be answered.
And so would you say your feelings towards the project are positive?
If the proper infrastructure is put in, because I know Loon Farms has been relocated, there's been that settled with the agricultural lands there. However, those questions need to be answered first before there's full support behind the project.
Let's switch tracks for a moment. Governor Abercrombie was defeated in the primary by a surprisingly high margin. How do you evaluate his performance, and what do you think went wrong? Michael.
I think basically what his years of experience, starting from as a university professor, working himself up to now being governor, I think his motives and what he did was meant well. I think he would be probably better if he just served in Congress. But as far as here in Hawaii, is what you say that gets you there. And I think basically a lot of people trusted him. And for him to deny some people the latitude, because there's certain things you cannot say in Hawaii custom. I mean, you cannot go around and say, you cannot do this, I'm the governor. It's my word or none. I mean, to me, is that he has to listen. And we got into same-sex issue. Was it a rush, or you could go into a because people during that time had spoken that they wanted to wait until the full legislative session. So to me, I think the governor was his worst enemy as far as what he does. He just failed to look in the mirror as far as what he did.
Lauren, your thoughts?
I think a lot of it comes down to relationships and trust. And that's what the voters really want, is knowing that we really are a voice for them and that we're somebody that they can trust and they can have a relationship with. And I think that's along the path where it went wrong, is not feeling that you can talk to him and have that relationship with the governor.
All right. Lauren, under what circumstances would you agree to raise taxes? Could you offer an example of anything that would necessitate that for you?
I think it would have to be an emergency situation, but right now the cost of living is so high. I can't foresee raising taxes on the people that are already struggling. Like I said, my husband and I work 2 jobs, and I know so many of my friends and family that have left to the mainland because they just can't afford it. And I think what we need to do is better management of the money that we have now, rather than just raising taxes.
Michael, for you, would it have to be an emergency?
Oh, it has to be an emergency. I don't think we should be raising tax. We should take a look at all the revenues that we have and basically do a complete audit within our government structure. Because every time as you open a paper, you read about misuse, abuse of funds and other things. I think we can, if we take a look at it. I mean, right now we have a potential governor who was a chair of Ways and Means, or is a chair of Ways and Means. So we have to be fiscal prudent. I mean, right now we have to take a look. The other issue is going to be the rail. Okay, the question is going to be with the cost overrun, they haven't looked at the maintenance. So are they going to extend the 0.5% tax to another 10 years or what? Will they get the money back for the overhead that goes to the state or not? But we need to take a look, because the pot for the EUTF and the Hurricane Fund is building. We don't want to take money from that just to balance the budget.
Would you support extending that tax?
No.
No. What about you, Lauren?
Not right now. I think we have to have creative ways. I mean, the rail is going to cost money, and we know that, and it's happening. There's no really stopping it now, but having to get creative. I don't think continuing to tax the people of Hawaii really is the answer.
If elected, what would be your first order of business, Michael?
The first order of business would be, besides the agricultural issue regarding the R2 to R1, is basically look at our business plan. Because we always say that we need to get jobs for people, but we need to help the small business, the entrepreneurs, the people want to come in. Because we have so much government regulation as far as unemployment taxes, bureaucracy regarding which area you have. Because just to open a store, you have different areas that you have to look at. So I feel right now that we need to take a look on a corporate tax and everything else. And I know right now the medical is going up, but we need to take a look at that first, because that's going to generate, because you have a lot of new people want to come to Hawaii, but the question is, how long will they stay? I mean, it's nice to come, but the question is it 2 years or what? Because we need this kind of people or businesses to come here and also spread their wings. Because like for me as an engineer, there's a lot of people want to come back, but the question is, can they come back? They're coming back because of their parents, unfortunately, but they need to find a way to sustain themselves, because right now our number one industry is tourism, but how do you, go further, how you can do it? And I'm looking at more of basically ag tourism, basically doing agriculture on the North Shore, because you see it with Dole, with cacao and everything else coming up. So there's a lot of opportunities on that side, so we can take a look at it. So we need to have where the businesses can make a further step and make sure that they can sustain themselves.
Lauren, your first order of business.
Is it in regards to legislation that we'd introduce?
Yes.
Okay. One of the bills that I introduced last year that passed through the House is a credit equivalency bill. And so what it really means is when you have been working in the industry, say you work in travel industry, and you've been there for 15 years and want to go back for your degree, taking the 101 classes doesn't necessarily make sense. You already have that experience. Being able to have that portfolio and get the credits, because we've learned if the cost is less and they have to spend less time in school, people are more likely to get their degrees. And so that bill will help people of Hawaii get their higher degrees and hopefully get higher paying jobs. And so to put that back through the legislature, and hopefully it will pass this year to get some UH credits for people.
This district represents the communities of 2 military bases. How are those constituents, are they in any way different from those outside the military bases? What do you think are their specific concerns, and how can you serve them? Lauren, let's start with you on this one.
I think one of the concerns is the potential leaving of troops of Schofield and Wheeler and the impact that it's going to have not only on the bases, but also on the communities around them. And it's an issue that is very important, and it's happening right now. And so I think that's something that needs to be addressed. And they are they're similar. They're constituents. I go to their schools, I go to their May Days, and so they are constituents just like the rest of the community, but they do have special needs.
That issue of troops leaving, how does that get addressed on a legislative level?
There's currently a letter writing campaign that the bases have asked us to participate in to just encourage the federal government that we're the epicenter of the Pacific. It is so important to have our troops here, not only for the economic viability of Hawaii, but also for future military plans.
Michael, your thoughts?
Well, right now is basically, with the military right now, we have no control what happened within the base, but basically is to provide the family as they go outside the fence, for us to provide business opportunity, especially the schooling. I know we have schools on campus like Halikula, Solomon, and Wheeler Intermediate Schools. So basically we need to provide that avenue of sustenance for them to make sure that they're comfortable. I mean, what the military does, I mean, they're within, but as far as what Lauren mentioned, giving support and everything else, we need to do that. We have to share our law with them to make sure that whenever they're here, if they get deployed, to basically that we need to support them. Because what I'm hearing now is that basically if they're going to be deployed, it would be more in the Asian countries, not to the Middle East. But again, we need to make them feel comfortable at home as far as being part of our ohana.
In your terms as lawmakers, what is the one piece of legislation that you authored that you are most proud of? Michael, let's start with you on this one.
There's quite a bit of it. I mean, right now, because I think one piece of legislation was basically saving Kahuku Hospital. Basically they were in dire straits because they were a private entity run by the Mormons during the time, and they wanted to. So basically, what happened is that when they declared bankruptcy, so I had to find out an entity right away. So what I proposed was to have the Kahuku Hospital be part of HSSC. So that way, once you're part of HSSC, they're part of the state, and that basically secured himself. And also what we did is we provide money up front, like $750,000 to make sure we to basically reinforce the bankruptcy note, and also make sure that they come in on the, right now as far as Kahuku Hospital, they are breaking even, they're achieving their purposes. But basically, you gotta remember, Kahuku Hospital, that's the biggest employer they have out there besides the school. So basically helping them out. I mean, there was a lot of other projects out there, but it's within the 10 years I've been there, so there's a lot of things we can look at.
Lauren.
I think the piece of legislation that I was most proud of is an agricultural housing bill. And coming from an agricultural family, my entire family lives on one street, right near the farm. And that's really where the heart of farming is. It's often a family business, and being able to have agricultural housing, workforce housing on agricultural lands is extremely important if we really want to build up our agricultural industry. And it's something that I was very proud of and looking forward to continue in the legislature.
This question is from a viewer at Cover It Live. How much of your campaign donations are from unions and special interest groups versus your direct constituents? Lauren, let's start with you.
Almost all of my contributions are from direct constituents, from family, from friends, from people that I've met throughout my life. And I think that's what's really important, because that's who I'm accountable to, is to the people who have given me the money and the people in my district.
For me, it's a 70-30, 30% with the union, 70% to the people that I know that I've been working with and soliciting with. So basically, it's people in the community. I have the fellow associate I have as an engineer and business people. So basically, that's what it is.
You touched on this earlier, but let's circle back to it. Especially on the North Shore, which seems particularly perhaps tourism dependent, one could argue, and agriculture. How do you prevent Hawaii and your district from an over-reliance on tourism? Michael, let's start with you.
Right now, it's like I said earlier, is that we need to basically build an agricultural hub right there. And basically, what we need right now is that to have a processing plant, whatever they grow. Like right now, we have Twin Bridge, we have asparagus there, we get pineapple like Dole, and we get cacao right there, and you have other people trying to grow, get the mangoes. So we need to get more of a processing plant, or what we have, from there they can distribute it up to the town and everything else, because right now they're proposing to do it in by Halomono, in where Dole is right now. So that's to me is right now, we need to get a center for what we have. Then what we do is that then we bring University of Hawaii to partner with the people in agriculture, so they have their own station. I know we have one in Pomoa, but it's obsolete a little bit, but we need to have one by the old mill. So basically, besides having the people doing surfboards and all that, but we need to basically provide that greater needs because of aquaculture also too.
Lauren.
I think agriculture is extremely important in our district, but it's combining the two. with ag tourism, and I think there's a lot of potential for that, whether it's we're the only state that can grow cacao or chocolate. There is a young farmer in Waialua. She's starting a goat farm and is going to be doing truffles and cheeses. And what it's going to be is an entire agricultural tourism process, people being able to come down and learn about it. You know, it's sad when students go, you know, where does a banana come from? And they say Costco. And so I think there's a huge industry for ag tourism, and being able to do that in our community will bring jobs, but also bring a different type of tourism to our community.
Let's finish the show. Each of you have one sentence, 2 sentences. Tell me why are you the better candidate. Lauren.
I think it's that new generation of leadership. It's that hands-on approach, and that I really have those roots in the district, and that's what really makes a difference, is being able to work in the community and have those roots. Michael.
I think mine is for relationship. There's more to give, and we need to look at the future, and besides looking at the future, mentoring our people that we have, the younger generation. But I think that I can bring the pluses and minuses, and especially as a legislator, you're basically there for 2 years and you need to worry about re-election. I think basically what we do now is we need somebody with the ground running.
All right, that's all the time we have. Thank you both for coming tonight.
Thank you, Maria.
Next time on Insights, we turn our focus to the windward and leeward sides of Oahu with the elections for State House Districts 43, Ewa Villages, Ko'olina, Nanakuli, and 48, Kaneohe, Kahaluu, and Haiku Valley, where 2 newcomers are battling to replace former Representative Jessica Woolley, who was appointed to head the State Office of Environmental Quality Control. That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Malia Maddock. Ahui ho.